lot to digest, a lot to get through. To help us do that, we're going to go to the voice of Texas high school football. He's the Texas High School Football Hall of Famer. We're joined on the phone line now on the hotline by the great Craig Way. Hey, Craig, pretty boring morning, huh?
Just as humdrum and ho-hum. I mean, today's the day I'm getting out of town on vacation. I thought, it's just another sleepy day.
Yeah.
Right.
You had your radio program this morning, and you had the executive director of the UIL, Dr. Charles Breithaupt, on your program. Obviously, Dr. Breithaupt has a big hand in shaping the way that UIL does business. When you talked with Dr. Breithaupt, what were your impressions on what he had to say?
Well, let me start off by saying I think it was probably, if anybody that knows Dr. Charles Breithaupt knows that he is, and I know I think UTEP and actually I think you'll agree with us, he is a modicum of cool. Mm-hmm. He is always, he's warm and affable and all that sort of stuff, but he's always under control. Because this morning, that said, it was probably the busiest I've heard him in terms of the conversation, because he's got 18 gazillion people pulling on him after this announcement. So he was great. He was friendly. We went through all that kind of stuff. That said, Charles, who can, he can, explain in great detail on things, did explain things. He just didn't do 3-minute explanations on things because there was 18 gazillion people lined up to visit with him about it. He explained everything in good detail. So I would call the tenor of my conversation with Dr. Breithaupt busy this morning. It was a busy conversation. Now, that said, he did explain, their thought process behind all of these decisions. And going to what you were just saying, Tep, right before I popped on when I was listening there, I do think you're right that it may well not be the last we hear with regard to an adjustment to a moving target, as they like to say, an ever-changing schedule. And here's an example of it. I'm just going to give you one minute example. This example could fall in basically any major market in the state of Texas. Dallas-Fort Worth, mm-hmm. Houston, San Antonio, Austin, you could even include Houston, obviously. You could also include, say, the Rio Grande Valley or Laredo, some of the other larger market areas that we're talking about here, maybe even some of East Texas. But in the greater Austin area, this ruling, as we know, would of course keep the 5A and 6As from being able to start their seasons until at the very earliest Thursday, September 24th. It would be the earliest they would do that. You say, okay, well, the 4As would go right in and jump right in. LBJ High School dropped the 4A this year. LBJ High School is right smack dab in the middle of Austin. So you say, well, what do they do? Okay, well, they had their schedule had Manor to open the season, and a little bit of a friendly rivalry between those two. Manor is a 5A school, so that one's off the table. So LBJ goes and finds another opponent, right? Not so fast. Remember, Travis County's health order would prohibit any activities before September 8th anyway. Mm-hmm. So this is an example of a fluid situation. There are 4A schools in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. There are 4A schools in the greater Houston area, in the San Antonio area. So that's just one example of how things have been thrown, as you mentioned, a bit into chaos. All that said, Tep, I don't know that they really could have done anything else and still preserve, by and large, not 100%, by and large, the integrity of a full regular season schedule. There are going to be outliers, and LBJ that I just pointed out is an example of an outlier that no matter how you slice them, they're not going to be able to get a full schedule in. But somehow, some way, I think they struck about the best bargain they could to have the most games played in a regular season schedule without just taking a hatchet to it and lopping off the front half of the regular season and not being able to play a full regular season schedule.
Yeah, what I wrote on TexasFootball.com this morning is that I view this as the least bad option. I don't think anybody in the UIL is going to say that this is the greatest plan of all time, because quite simply, there were no great plans. There are no, the situation does not lend itself to having great, perfect plans. But this strikes me as the least bad option. One thing, Craig, that I'm particularly interested in, and a thing that I think is going to be really interesting down the stretch, is this is the first time that we're really, in a lot of ways, we're seeing the UIL treat different classifications differently. In a lot of ways, the UIL operates as this one kind of behemoth that goes and they point their laser at something and they take care of it, and everyone plays by the same rules. Did this announcement this morning? I know you have kind of been hearing the same rumblings that I've heard about changes imminent in the Texas high school football season. Did this ruling surprise you this morning?
Only mildly. And the reason why I say that is because of having visited a couple of weeks ago with Dr. Brydup. He hinted at the possibility of having to do a Solomon split the baby kind of thing, ruling, if you will, with regard to this. But he pointed this out again this morning when I visited with him on my show, that the vast majority of districts in the state of Texas are in lesser metropolitan areas. So you have to consider the whole of it, even though the population base, as we know, and we've talked about time and again with regard to realignment, falls along that line of I-35 and east of I-35. So there was no easy answer. Like you said, was it the movie Argo? What's the best bad idea? That kind of thing. What's the best bad idea they could come up with? It was not going to be something that was going to be easily resolved one way or another, and yet it was about the only way I think they could do to have the best shot at playing a full regular season schedule for the vast majority, and that's the key here, the vast majority of the schools in the state of Texas. One thing that I asked Dr. Brydup on, I said, Charles, how important was it, because apparently it looks like it was, to protect the full body of a regular season schedule? And he said it was very, very important, because when you think about it, and you and I have talked about it, Jeff, how many teams make the Texas high school football playoff?
704.
What's our number? 704. Roughly half. Okay? That still leaves half the schools, the football playing schools in the state of Texas, who would be done at the end of the regular season. Well, if you lop off half of a regular season, now you're talking about half of the populace playing only half of a regular season. So they've lost that as well. He said the importance of the regular season experience for as many student athletes as possible was of paramount concern to them. That's why this went into effect, to try to protect as much of the regular season for as many of the people as possible. It's not a perfect solution by any stretch. There are, as I mentioned, outliers or some programs that may fall through the cracks. But for the vast majority, I think it was about the best they could do.
Craig Way, the Texas High School Football Hall of Famer, joining us here on Texas Football Today. Get involved in the conversation at hashtag TF Today. All right, Craig. Now we kind of turn our attention to the new look of the 2020 Texas high school football season. What, in your mind, are you looking for next? I think that you're seeing a lot of coaches that are scrambling to get schedules put together. That are doing this and that, to make sure that their season goes off as well as it can. What, in your mind, are you viewing as the next step, the next shoe to drop, the next thing that fans should be on a lookout for? Because I'll tell you what mine is suddenly you are going to have some very interesting district executive committee meetings. That's going to be the hottest ticket in town.
Yeah, and I think that's why Dr. Susan Elsa, the director of athletics, yesterday during coaching school, stressed the word flexibility there with regard to scheduling. You're right. There's going to have now, if we are to believe that for the vast majority, and I have to say this because, depending on local and state mandates coming down with regard to the pandemic, But if we are to believe the vast majority of the schools in 5A and 6A can just shift their schedule, in other words, like Travis and Arlington Martin playing on September 25th instead of August 28th, as an example, if we are to believe it, same thing with, Westlake High and off and South Lake Carroll, if we are to believe that the vast majority will be able to shift their schedules and move, then maybe they can make that move. But it's, as you pointed out, it's going to be a lot of the programs who've had to drop an opponent and pick up an opponent. And again, we'll say it till the cows come home, the non-district schedule isn't as important as the district schedule. We all know that. But it doesn't mean you can't try to see if you can't play all of the entirety of the schedule. I'll tell you another thing that comes to mind, Cap. See how far you've gone in your thinking on this. Mm. We know that the UIL listed all of its dates for the state championships. Mm-hmm. And for 5A and 6A, they said January TBD. Would it be reasonable to guess that the reason that's a TBD, and I asked Dr. Brightup about it, he said, we're looking at around January 11th, but we have to have some flexibility. You know what that says to me, don't you? Conflict, Dallas Cowboys home playoff game on a Saturday, maybe?
Well,
maybe that's why. Maybe that's the reason for the flexibility, just in case there's a divisional playoff game. That's it. If I remember correctly, that's NFL divisional.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. That would be.
There, we've all been there many, many times on a state championship weekend when the Cowboys had a Sunday home game, but you want to make sure you don't have a Saturday playoff game. So I'm wondering if maybe that's part of the logic that's going into putting the TBD up there.
I think so. And the other thing that I think is really interesting is if you look at presently the current schedule, they are saying that they are going to be games Christmas week, meaning that would be, and that would be, I believe, the regional semifinals of the 6A and 5A playoffs.
And Christmas falls on a Friday.
Christmas, of course, in this year falls on a Friday. They're certainly not going to allow teams to play on a Friday, on Christmas Day, but that means you may have Christmas Eve games. That means you may have days after Christmas or games after the day after Christmas. It's a really, really bizarre situation. One thing I want to ask you, Craig, and I want to see if you were hearing the same thing that I was hearing. A lot of fans and a lot of people were asking us, what do you think about moving to the spring? What do you think about moving to the spring? Furthermore, there were other people, although I would say a smaller congregation of people who were saying, do you think the UIL is going to cancel the season? My in talking with people at and near and around the UIL, I found what I heard was that spring and no football were fundamentally like last resorts. Were you hearing similar things?
Absolutely. And I asked Dr. Brightup again about that. They were adamantly opposed to playing it in the spring. And he said, why? Why the opposition? Think about what we just went through. They completely lost their spring season. They had to stop the UIL state basketball tournament in its tracks, and they were unable to complete to completion golf, tennis, track and field, and, of course, softball and baseball. They were unable to do it. What are you going to do? Are you going to imperil those again because of participation on both sides? So that's why they were against that and wanting to try to make sure to ensure that those seasons can be played as best possible. Again, this is going to go back to the no solution being perfect deal, because there are many who play both, especially in the lower, smaller classifications. Aha! That's why you go back. Another reason for 1A through 4A staying on schedule, so that those kids who in the small towns and small schools who are playing basketball right after football still have their same time frame. Now, if your team is going 4 rounds deep into the playoffs at the 2A or 3A or 4A level, your participation in basketball clearly is going to be affected. But that's an annual challenge every year anyway. This at least preserves it for those schools from 4A down to 1A, because we do have to think globally in terms of their school member body and not just in the major markets, although obviously it attracts the lion's share of attention from those of us who are covering and following and broadcasting high school football, the 5As and the 6As. We have to keep everybody in.
Finally, Craig Way, the Texas High School Football Hall of Famer, joining us on TF today. Appreciate you hopping on with us, Craig. But I want to ask you that we are now, as scheduled, going to have January football. That's on the docket now. That is UIL canon right now. Is January football? Craig Way, you're also one of the chief historians of Texas high school football. I know that Cleburne and Houston Heights, way back in 1920, played their state championship game in January. When's the last time we had January high school football, at least sanctioned January high school football?
It was that, if not that game, right around that time, there were a couple of other games. There was also a late that happened that came up in December. But if my historical memory, thankfully I was not alive then at that time, but if my historical memory of reading about the history of it all, it wasn't the only January game, I don't think. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't take long to call the roll of it. So it's been a long, long time since we've had January games, and it begs the question, because somebody texted in, well, didn't they used to play state championship games if they have a scheduling conflict with AT&T? Didn't they used to play state championship games at DKR, Texas Memorial Stadium, Austin? Yes, they did. They have had games played there. But are you really that excited about sitting in the stands for a mid-January state championship game? Listen, coaches like to play state second round and third round games in environmentally controlled areas. Just ask the head coach of the defending 6A Division II state champions, Todd Dodge at Westlake. By the way, happy birthday, Todd Dodge, today. He always coaches want to have as many factors under control as possible. So securing facilities, indoor facilities in January is going to be important to all of this, no matter the classification.
He's Craig Way. He's a Texas High School Football Hall of Famer. He, of course, let's do him on the horn down in Austin every day on Light the Tower, and of course the host of my co-host on High School Scoreboard Live, which I don't even know, Craig. I was trying to think of the TV element of this, and I'm like,
22 weeks. Jeff, say it with me. 22 weeks. Let's have it. Let's start it in August and finish it in January. I'm all about it.
This is the energy we love to see.
Craig Way, he's fired up. We're all fired up. Craig, appreciate your time, my friend. Try to calm down off the adrenaline. I'm trying to calm down myself, but I'm sure we're going to see each other soon, partner.
You bet. Take care, guys.
See you, Craig.
Craig Way.